happening, everybody? Ryan Thomas, thank you so much for tuning in to the Thomas Take Sports Podcast tonight, right here on the Buffalo Fanbase Podcast Network or any and all podcasting platforms in which the Thomas Take Sports Podcast is streamed and recorded and heard loud and clear on all audio podcasting platforms as well. Really pumped up for this edition of the podcast tonight. Another great episode in which I break down the news, notes, and yes, give you my thoughts on a few topics pertaining to the Buffalo Bills and their training camp thus far. A lot to discuss tonight. Really excited to get started. Let's get cracking. Okay, so as I told you guys, we were going to get cracking. We were going to talk about all of the training camp news and notes that I definitely wanted to discuss today. A lot to discuss because as each season approaches, we need to talk about training camp because this is what makes football so special is that training camp is built to be the last opportunity in which the players have their say as to who they are and where they should be ranked within the depth charts. They're all battling each other. And then once training camp is over, you're then a teammate to that person that you battled against or battled with for the better part of September, October, November, December, and then some, God willing, if you're a really good team. So training camp, to put it mildly, training camp is really an important opportunity for every player that is on the Buffalo Bills roster, all 90 guys, to show what they're capable of and to show where they belong and how they belong on the Buffalo Bills. So this is my favorite time of year. Training camp is a big point of emphasis for me, where I like to look at some of the players that nobody's heard of. Right? Guys that are fresh, guys that are new, and guys that have really shown up and showed out in a very limited sample size. Yes, because we still got so much left of training camp to, discuss, but we also have to look at how those players can potentially fit, how those players can potentially work in the near future or practice squad or whatnot. So I first wanted to discuss tonight, yes, I'm going back to it, Keon Coleman and the positive reports that we've heard from Keon Coleman's Stefan Who campaign continues. The battle in which Keon Coleman will face consistently being compared in wide receiver one status to Stephon Diggs is going to be something that we're going to be talking about, I think, for not just this season, but for many seasons ahead. Keon Coleman has been talked about, has been praised as the wide receiver one in great chemistry thus far with Bills quarterback Josh Allen. Allen to Coleman has been a common thread, a common denominator in virtually every tweet, every video, every take that I've read from those that have been at Bills training camp, as have I. I've seen it. I've seen Keon Coleman's physicality as a wide receiver, even in his college days, which was what really excited me about the prospect coming to the Buffalo Bills and being a part of the Buffalo Bills. Looking at it outside, looking in, I really love the skill set in comparison to what Josh Allen can do offensively, what Josh Allen does offensively as an extender of plays, as a guy that can make a receiver come back on his route. Keon Coleman more than willing to do that. So really exciting stuff that we've seen that thus far, and it shows why the Buffalo Bills drafted him as high as they did. I think many people within the game of football, analysts that I greatly respect, Louis Riddick in particular, looks at Keon Coleman as a guy that, he's going to be a real one. He's going to be a player that I think will be talked about. We will be talking about him as well for many years to come. That's the hope, and thus far he's shown the potential. As well, Javon Solomon impressing in camp, the defensive end, of course, drafted by the Buffalo Bills late in the draft out of Troy. Round 5, 168 overall pick, Javon Pyrie Solomon, one of the coolest middle names ever, 23 years old, 6'1", 250, and looked at Buffalo as the sole place for him and is categorized as a true bull-rushing defensive end, a guy that just simply loves to rush the passer, which is music to the ears of every Buffalo Bills fan. That aspect of their defense has been missing in a great way for the last, I'd say, 2-3 years. The last time, though, that I remember the Buffalo Bills having a defensive line, a defensive front that can generate sacks was one in which 2014, we'll say. So it's been a bit, right? It's 10 years. The cold front, Mario Williams, Marcel Darius, Kyle Williams, and Jerry Hughes. Can we get a little bit of that with Javon Solomon, with Ed Oliver, with AJ Epinesa, with DeAndre Carter, with Greg Rousseau, and the return of the pass rush king, question mark, exclamation point, the emphasis on those two, question mark and exclamation point, as this show is sponsored by 26shirts.com. This is my lead-in to the 26shirts.com sponsorship. Del Reed will be putting together the return of the pass rush king t-shirts. I'm going to coin the phrase. I think that it's highly possible, from everything I've heard, everything I've seen, that there is no player that knows his body better than himself. And for all my criticisms of Von Miller last offseason, for all my criticisms of Von Miller during this past season, I should say as well, no player typically knows their body as well as themselves. Von Miller said that he should not have been out there last year. Von Miller said he was put out there too soon. Von Miller said that they should have waited. They shouldn't have rushed him out, that he shouldn't have been out there, which the results would allude to. Maybe he shouldn't have been out there. Maybe Von Miller was put out there way too soon, and that he needed to be slowly, methodically brought along. He wasn't, and his play suffered. His play impacted the Buffalo Bills in a negative form and fashion, and now he's healthy. Now he's an offseason removed, another offseason removed, I should say, from that horrific knee injury that he suffered on Thanksgiving Day in Detroit a year ago, more than a year ago now. And if we can get even an ounce of what Von Miller was in LA and Denver this season with a year older version of AJ Epinesa, a year older version of Greg Rousseau, a new pass rusher in Javon Solomon, DeAndre Carter, that's their unit. That's the unit that Sean McDermott wants to prop up. That's the unit that Bobby Babich wants to prop up, and that's the unit that they need to be one of the best teams in the National Football League. I think that's the difference between them being the best team in the National Football League and not. Right? If they could just get to the quarterback a little bit more, if they could just get to a Pat Mahomes a little bit more, if they could get to a Joe Burrow a little bit more, if they get to any quarterback just a little bit more than what they have these last couple of years, I think that it could make a big impact on their season. So the return of the pass rush king, rumblings of Von Miller looking as if he is ready, willing, and able to go. this season, that could be huge for the Buffalo Bills. Now, Curtis Samuel, the Swiss Army knife, this was a free agent addition that I really liked. This was a free agent that I really had hoped would land on a team that would finally be able to use him, land on a team that he could get the targets that he deserves, land on a team that would allow him to be the player that he deserves to be. Because Curtis Samuel was one of my favorite wide receivers in college. I loved what he brought to the Ohio State Buckeyes. I loved what he brought to the Carolina Panthers when they did have Cam Newton. And post Cam Newton, Curtis Samuel's career kind of went all different ways, right? Went from Carolina then to Washington hoping that Alex Smith was going to be their guy. That didn't turn out for the obvious reason of that horrific injury, to say the least, probably one of the most horrific injuries I've ever seen, in which Alex Smith pretty much lost his career, right? He came back, but he was never the same. He was never going to be the same after suffering that type of injury. So Curtis Samuel is a player that I look at as one that potentially Joe Brady will use in a wide variety of ways, not just lined up at wideout, not just lined up inside, outside, all around. That's how he's going to be used as a wideout. But I could see Curtis Samuel being used as a running back in swing pass formation sets, in screens, halfback screens, all sorts of different motions and things like that. I know that Joe Brady was pumped to get back Curtis Samuel, because we have to remember Curtis Samuel was in Carolina while Joe Brady was in Carolina. So that's a big factor within this offseason. And I know I hit you guys with a lot. I've hit you guys with a lot so far. That's what I do. I come, ready and raring to go. But back to the Keon Coleman stuff, and this kind of goes hand in hand with Curtis Samuel, but, many people are wondering, and rightfully so, they're wondering whether or not the Bills have enough at the wide receiver position. Are they good enough? Does Josh Allen have enough around him? I'm not saying they're wrong. I'm not saying that they don't have the right to question that. But what I am saying is, you can make a case that this core group of wide receivers, as it's looked thus far, listed as such, you could say Coleman, you could say Shakir, you could say Samuel, and then you have a veteran that was added late in the offseason, an MVS, Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Those are four locks, I think, to make the roster. And you can also throw in Mac Hollins in that, I guess, group of five players, because of the fact that Hollins can block. He can run block, he can pass block. He's a really good blocking wide receiver, which they really loved with Gabe Davis. So Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, and MVS, and then, we'll throw Mac Hollins into the equation as well. But realistically, when I look at all five of those guys, I like that group. I look at that group, I see youth, I see experience, I see experienced youth as well, and I also see some hunger on that group that I didn't see last year, from last year's group that included Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis, included 240 targets that are now playing for Jacksonville and Houston, respectfully. So those 240 targets have to go somewhere. Some of them are going to go to the guys that you see here, Coleman, Shakir, Samuel, and MVS. Others will go to Kincaid, will go to Knox, go to Cook, will go to Davis, who has not been talked about at all by really anybody but myself. And I know that for a fact. Nobody's talked about Ray Davis as much as me. But which one out of those guys is going to be the guy? And that's what people want to know. Everyone wants to have an idea of what guy is going to be the guy. And the problem with that is I don't think they need to have an answer to that at any point during the season. And I don't know if they will, because this could be a year in which we see every different week, a new wide receiver target that is targeted more than anybody. And that makes Buffalo's offense that much more interesting, that much more dominant, that much more dynamic, because the defense won't know who's the number one read. Defense won't be looking out for Stephon Diggs like they were last year. They'll be looking out for, well, he does throw it to Coleman here, does throw it to Shakir here, this down and distance. They love to get it to Curtis Samuel. Those are the types of discussions that the opposing team is going to have, and those are the types of discussions that I want opposing teams to have. I want the opposing team to not know who their number one wideout is. But if I were a guessing man, which I don't like to guess, but if I was, the guy that's going to have the most targets is Dalton Kincaid. The guy that's going to be looked at in crunch time and clutch situations is Dalton Kincaid. If it's anybody else, I'd be shocked. And here's why. Kincaid is looked at as not only one of the best tight end prospects in recent years, that's the obvious, but is looked at as, among these players, he's kind of a veteran in working with Allen outside of Shakir. So maybe wide receiver-wise, Shakir might be the most targeted receiver they have. He'll line up in the slot. He'll get open in the slot. He'll catch everything that's thrown to him because he didn't drop a ball all last season. So putting a lot of pressure on him with that, but he didn't. He'll be targeted more than anybody as the wide receiver goes, but Kincaid is the one. He is the one that everybody should be talking about as the guy that Josh Allen is going to look to more than anybody. And if there was ever a case of a tight end in year two having a career year, this is it. This is it. Having not just a career year for him, because obviously he was a rookie last year, but having a career year meaning leading the league in receptions for tight ends, yards for tight ends, touchdowns for tight ends. I could see Dalton Kincaid leading the way potentially among all three of those categories. A monster season could be ahead for Dalton Kincaid with the Buffalo Bills. And I've talked about it in fantasy, aspects too. I'm not going to spoil this, but I have a fantasy football magazine coming out within the next couple weeks here. It's safe to say Dalton Kincaid's ranked pretty high on that list, on the tight end list, I should say, positional rankings, cheat sheets, whatever you want to call it. He's around 4 or 5 target, maybe even round 3, depending on how many teams are in your league. But Kincaid is the one. Coleman is going to be talked about so much, and there are so many great reasons to that. A lot of that has to do with the personality. A lot of that has to do with the position. A lot of that has to do with the guy that he, quote unquote, is replacing within the position. But when we look at the moves that were made this offseason, when we look at how this team was built in previous seasons, I think they drafted Dalton Kincaid in the first round for a reason. I think they drafted Keon Coleman as their first pick in 2024 for a reason. Those guys are going to be a part of this process here on rookie contracts for the next 3-4 years. Dalton Kincaid, he's got that 5th-year option. So breaking that down to what that'll be, those guys will be 2 focal point pieces, God willing, in short order, and they'll be on rookie deals, which is a luxury that not many teams have at the wide receiver and tight end position. So there you have it. Those are my training camp news and notes for the Buffalo Bills' first week of training camp. I will mention, to wrap this up, that the safety position is a point of worry for most Bills fans because Colt Bishop had an injury late in practice the other day, and the Bills have signed 2 free agent safeties due to Cole Bishop's injury, as well as Mike Edwards' injury. So safety is a position to watch. Safety is a position that could look much different than what was anticipated. And those safeties are so stinking important to what Sean McDermott and Bobby Babich want to do that they got to have two guys in there that they can rely on. And they got to have two guys in there that can stay healthy, can be relied upon. And that's what just makes the greatness of Jordan Poyer and Micah Hyde that much more of a feather in their own cap, that they were not only able to play for Buffalo for as long as they did, they were able to stay healthy for as long as they did. I know Poyer had his issues with his shoulder. I know Hyde has had his issues with his neck. That's why he's not on the team right now, as of now. But they got to figure it out. And I hope that they can. Right now is not the time you want to be losing, players for a long period of time heading into the season. This is the time of year where you want to learn who can be those key contributors to your team as you get closer to the season. You don't want to lose bodies. You don't want to lose players in camp. And the fact that they are is not a good sign. But hopefully it's not too long term. Of course, I really hope you guys enjoyed tonight's show. I wanted to bring you guys a great show. I know we're in the middle of training camp. There's really not game discussion yet, but I love putting out a podcast every week with the fan base as I do here tonight, and I hope you enjoyed it. With that being said, I'm Ryan Thomas. That was the Thomas Take Sports Podcast. I'll see you next week.